I was never supposed to be on shift at night, let alone inside a classified data relay station buried beneath a snowfield in northern Iceland. The assignment was supposed to be routine, just a temporary data assistant helping digitize old security tapes from a forgotten satellite link facility, long since decommissioned and forgotten by most of the world, except for a few people who knew better than to ask why it was still powered. The place felt less like a workplace and more like a mausoleum. Dim green lights humming above dust-covered terminals, walls lined with server racks that seemed to breathe softly in the silence, and a constant low vibration underfoot, as if the earth itself was unsettled by what lay within. There were only 3 of us assigned to the shift: myself, a systems technician named Jacob, who had worked there for over a year without ever asking questions, and a Foundation-appointed security officer known only as K, a tall woman with short black hair, a rigid posture that never relaxed, and eyes that never once blinked longer than necessary. No one knew her real name, and no one dared to ask. She wore a badge that overrode every locked door, carried a sidearm that had never been fired, and had the cold silence of someone who had seen things others weren't meant to understand. The first 2 hours passed without incident, as expected. I sat in one of the back terminals, scanning archived logs from early 2003, long strings of disconnected metadata and thermal footage from orbital satellites, all stripped of context. My job was to categorize anomalies, if any appeared. I had done the same thing for weeks and found nothing but static, camera drift, and the occasional lost bird. But at exactly 1:37 a.m., the terminal in front of me flickered, not with a glitch, not a drop in connection, but a kind of internal stutter, like something inside the system hesitated before obeying. Without input, a new file appeared in the root directory, its timestamp blank, its source field unreadable. The name of the file sent a tremor through my chest before I even fully processed what I was looking at. SCP-096_recovered_view_angle_04. Jacob, curious as always and never appropriately cautious, leaned over my shoulder and squinted at the file name. "You digging in level 4 content now?" he asked with a lopsided grin, assuming it was just a misfiled video log or some technician's prank. I didn't respond. My hand hovered over the keyboard, uncertain whether to close the file or run it. Before I could make a decision, the system acted on its own and the video launched. The screen showed static at first, then gradually resolved into a grainy black and white image of what looked like a mountain ridge covered in snow, with thick clouds drifting past the peaks. At the base of the frame, barely visible through the static distortion, was a small humanoid figure walking slowly along the ice, its posture strangely rigid, its limbs elongated and disproportionate. It would have looked almost human, if not for the unnatural slowness in its movement and the faint glow around its outline, as if the very air recoiled from touching it. And then, as the camera auto-adjusted focus, the figure turned. It looked directly into the lens. I don't know how long I stared. I don't remember telling my hands to move, but at some point, my fingers slammed the power button with such force that the monitor cracked at the corner. The screen went black, but the image burned into my mind refused to leave. Jacob, confused but still amused, raised his eyebrows. "It's just a thermal feed. You didn't even get a good look at the face." And that was when I knew, with a certainty deeper than thought and colder than the walls around us, that something irreversible had just begun. I had read about it, buried entries in redacted archives, half-censored documents labeled SCP-096, warnings about visual exposure, even accidental, even through recorded media. I stood up, heart pounding in my throat, and called out to Kay. She didn't respond. Jacob had already turned back to the terminal, mumbling something about file recovery and bad sector caching. He tapped a few keys, and before I could stop him, the screen came alive once more, showing the same snowy ridgeline, but this time, the camera was zoomed in closer, and in that moment, I could feel the air pressure shift, as if something ancient and unspeakably violent had just been made aware of us. A low, irregular hum began to vibrate through the floor beneath our feet, not mechanical, but almost alive. The server fans behind us spun faster, then faster still, until they screamed like turbines, and somewhere deep in the data racks a red light began to blink. Jacob froze. He didn't scream. He didn't blink. He just stared, his eyes dilated, mouth slightly open, lips trembling like he was about to cry. "I think it saw me," he whispered, but the words barely left his throat before the entire facility went dark. Not a flicker, not a warning, just complete, consuming black. And then came the sound. It started distant, like thunder crawling up from beneath the earth. But it was no storm. It was broken, furious, high-pitched in some moments and gut-deep in others, as if several mouths were trying to scream through a single throat. It wasn't animal. It wasn't human. It was something designed to punish. And it was getting closer. The walls began to vibrate with each rhythmic impact. Footsteps, impossibly fast, impossibly heavy, slamming through ice, steel, and reinforced barriers like they were made of paper. Somewhere behind me, I heard Jacob whisper a prayer, but even he knew it would do nothing. The last thing I saw before I turned and ran was the red emergency light near the exit flashing once, and in that flash, I saw the hallway behind me collapse inward, not from explosion, not from fire, but from force, pure, direct, unreasoning force. And then I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the auxiliary hall, past flickering warning strobes, through the cold airlocks that hissed as the pressure shifted behind me. Somewhere behind those walls, Jacob was still sitting, frozen in front of the terminal, waiting for something he had no chance of outrunning. And then I heard it. The sound wasn't the scream that had come earlier, like a jagged blade dragging across the atmosphere itself. What I heard now was the sound of bone and flesh separating, of something being torn apart with methodical, unyielding precision. No rage, no chaos, just inevitability. I ducked into the nearest containment subroom, a server insulation vault designed to withstand electromagnetic surges. The door was 4 inches of lead composite. It wouldn't hold for long, but it was all I had. I locked it behind me and pressed my back to the cold metal, sliding slowly to the floor. I sat in the dark. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The only light came from the faint glow of a backup monitor still active in the corner of the room. Its screen cracked, but not dead. The video file that had started all this was still open, paused at frame 212. The figure was staring into the lens, and though it was just pixels, I couldn't shake the feeling it was still looking straight at me. Then the door handle rattled. Not violently, just once. A slow, deliberate click of pressure being tested. And then nothing. Silence. A silence so deep it sounded like the entire facility had been dropped into a vacuum. Even the humming from the servers ceased, like they, too, were holding their breath. I waited. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I don't know. Time had stopped meaning anything. Eventually, when the emergency lighting rebooted and the mainframe systems began sputtering back to life, I emerged from the vault like a man crawling out of a collapsed grave. The corridor was painted with red, not fire alarm red. Blood. It stretched across the floor and up the walls in long, wet arcs, as if something massive had been dragged, piece by piece, through every hallway. Limbs, skin, faces, none of them remained whole. Jacob's body was nowhere to be found. Only his lanyard, twisted and snapped, lay on the ground like a ribbon left after a ritual. And in the central console room, where the original file had appeared, I found something worse. The file was gone, erased, but in its place, another one had been created. Same file name, different view angle. SCP-096_view_angle_05. Its timestamp was current. Its origin was internal lens, server room 3. That was the room I had just come from. I didn't remember any visible camera in there. No lens. No indicator light. Nothing. But the file had recorded my image, my face, my location, my moment of panic in the dark, crouched beneath the emergency console. I watched the video loop once, then again, and in the final frames, just before the feed cut, the camera lens tilted slightly, not like a machine, but like an eye deciding where to look next. The official report, when it finally surfaced through layers of silence and redacted paperwork, would attribute the entire event to a corrupted archive file, an unfortunate systems breach triggered during a satellite calibration protocol, resulting, they claimed, in a cascade of data malfunctions and ultimately, a chemical accident that left the entire facility uninhabitable. The deaths were dismissed as collateral, the site permanently sealed, and a wide-reaching amnestic directive was quietly deployed across local emergency services and civilian contractors, ensuring that no one would ask questions the Foundation had no intention of answering. And yet, they let me live. Whether it was because I never truly saw its face in full, or because some department higher than any clearance I'd ever touched wanted to observe what came next, I never found out. But I carried the silence with me like radiation, and deep down, I began to suspect that survival had not been a gift, but a condition. Exactly 2 weeks after I returned home, in the middle of a windless night, my tablet, a device I hadn't used in days, lit up without warning, bathing the dark room in a cold, clinical glow. There were no notifications, no sounds, no boot sequence, only a screen of solid black, until one line of text appeared at the center, as though it had been waiting in the dark. SCP-096_view_angle_06. There was no timestamp, no audio, no video feed, just a single still frame. It was me, captured from an angle I didn't recognize, my own face frozen in the moment I had crouched behind the console in the subroom, eyes wide and unblinking, looking, without question, directly into the camera. And beneath that image, written in stark system, font with no emotion and no margin for misinterpretation, was the final confirmation. Exposure confirmed. ETA 3 minutes. I didn't scream. I didn't run. Because by then, I had come to understand something no manual, no containment protocol, no briefing ever says aloud. The shy one does not forgive, and it never ever stops.